group for phase one, and we are very pleased that you have stuck it out all this way, and we wanted to bring you together this one last time to share with you the results of the small group meetings and the modeling that CT has done. And we also invited council members to attend and other interested parties. And so, because the purpose of this group was to learn about the issues with the city's stormwater management and wastewater management, and look at the range of possibilities that then CT could begin to model that could help then in terms of what the city council will ultimately adopt in terms of addressing the issues. And so with that, I'd like to invite the city council members to introduce themselves and be acknowledged.
Hi, Cindy Marks. I met a lot of you when you first started to roll out the task force. Nice to see that you've all stuck with it. I'm very eager to hear about your progress and where you ended up on this task force. It's been a very important issue that I'm sure we'll be talking about on council over the next several months. So thanks for your commitment.
Hi, Tom Bullock, Lakewood City Council, and this is the first meeting I've had a chance to attend, although many have been on my calendar. So I'm glad I was make it to this one. So look forward to your recommendations.
And just to reiterate, this is the last of this group's meeting for phase one, but phase one isn't the end of the project. And so Bob will go into that a little later. I don't mean to imply that this is the last time you come to help the city and CT with this issue. So we hope to have events and opportunities for you to continue to help out on this project, and we have other requests for you that we'll get to at a later time in tonight's meeting. But first of all, I would like to say that as a way of thanking you for your participation and a mechanism for you to continue talking to one another, the mayor has proposed a social date for you, or a social meeting, Tuesday, May 24th at 7:30 p.m. at a place to be determined.
At 6 p.m.
Oh, 6 to 7:30, sorry. 6 to 7:30. So this is the official last meeting of phase one, but there are, like I said, additional events, and with the hope that you'll continue to talk among members, talk to your neighbors and other Lakewood residents about the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob, and we'll hear the report out on our 4 different small group project areas. And Julia has, I think, touched base with one representative from each of the 4 groups. So we'll start out with somebody giving an update or a summary of the primary or the main points for each of the groups. And I think we're starting with you, Glenn, group 1.
That's news to me, but I'm happy to do it. Julia, thank you for giving me the heads up. But you did give me.
I thought we volunteered you at the last meeting.
Okay, all right. Well, we had Larchmont, and let me get on my map so I remember where we were. Larchmont running between Madison and Detroit, and we had a very interesting set of discussions. The main points that we came up with, we really couldn't afford to do a full separation. We have parking on the street, so we couldn't do a whole lot of permeable pavement on the whole street. But what we came up with was looking at permeable pavement on the sidewalks and on the driveway aprons. And we thought that would at least get us in the game of trying to catch some of the water before it got into the street. So like at many streets in Lakewood, there's lots of driveway aprons and lots of sidewalks. So we thought that would be a pretty big chunk of permeable pavement. We also looked at our tree lawns. We had a pretty, not wide tree lawns, but we had significant tree lawn widths, and we thought spiral retention in those would be another strategy. And then we had an interesting situation at the south end of the street, up by Madison, where, again, kind of bearings again, There's a few small streets, you might recognize the names, Archdale, is it Freeze or Fries? Anyway, there's a couple little streets that go off to the west, and they have a separated sewer there. So we could grab the first 20 or 25 houses of the street and reroute the drainage into those, the stormwater into those, and really pick off a little bit of the stormwater that doesn't have to go all the way down the rest of the street. So it was a really unique little situation that we sort of just found by accident looking at the map. So those were really the three main ideas. One other idea we had that didn't really make it on the list was down at the Detroit end. There are two commercial buildings with pretty significant parking lots in the back that we thought there might be a chance to sneak in some surface retention there, some unique ways to capture a little bit at that end. But that's private property. We have to work with those owners. But that's pretty much what our three of you guys are on our committee over there. So you're shaking your head. I think that was the main points that we came up with on Larchmont.
Good. So the kind of the rotation we went through here was to evaluate or take a look at different preferences and then take those preferences back and put them into the model and determine if the suggestions coming out of the group were effective in bringing the combined sewer overflow into compliance with the policy. So this one's the study area. This is Larchmont between Madison and Detroit. There is an overflow right there at the end of Larchmont. And so when we ran this through the model, lo and behold, there was a significant drop in both the number of overflows and the volume when we evaluated the first thing, which was a permeable pavement on sidewalks and driveway aprons. And not quite as effective when we looked at just doing bioretention as curb bump outs. There was still some overflows after we modeled that. The first one had no overflows when we looked at just the Larchmont area. Like every sewer in Lakewood, there are other sewers that impact what you do, what happens on Larchmont. There's a lot of sewers in this area that connect to Detroit Avenue. Larchmont connects to it, and there's some influence on the overflow because there's just a lot of water in the sewers on Detroit Avenue. But even at that, assuming that we were able to accurately model this area, the application of the preferences on Larchmont when applied to other areas in the city, and these lighter green areas are essentially the other areas where we would suggest that those preferences be carried into those areas also, that the overflows, the combined sewer overflows came into compliance with the policy, which was to have 4 overflows or less. So as we go through this and we talk about the areas, you're going to see this is all additive. So we're talking about the first area, the dark green being Larchmont, and the lighter green being where we would apply lessons learned from Larchmont to other areas that have combined sewer overflows. So, any questions on that? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Permeable surface comes up many times. Is there an agreement as to what is the best permeable surface and what is the cost differential versus conventional pavement?
I can assure you there's no agreement.
I mean, that was one of the things when we were out with that Parma.
Yes.
She had 4 or 5 different areas, different types of permeable surface, and I asked her, and she said, they all sort of wear out with time.
Well, they all have their limitations, and in this particular case where we were talking about permeable pavement for sidewalks, I think that realistically, you will probably be looking at a choice between concrete permeable concrete or permeable pavers. And I doubt that we would go to the expense of the permeable pavers themselves. I think that permeable concrete would be probably more cost effective over a larger area than the pavers. I don't think we're gonna be looking at things like asphalt. I don't think a lot of people are gonna wanna see asphalt sidewalks in their neighborhood. But that evaluation of one material over another really is gonna start to show up in phase 2 of the program. Right now, in phase 1, our delivery to the EPA is to do kind of a planning level response to the need for an integrated wet weather improvement plan. So I expect that what we submit to them will be essentially, we're looking at permeable pavement for sidewalks, aprons, some bioretention, the details to be forthcoming. But we need to get buy-in from the EPA on doing that approach. And that's going to be something of a challenge in itself, because the EPA, while they have endorsed the integrated planning framework, to actually endorse it as part of your CSO controls is not common yet. So we have a little bit of explaining and promoting to the EPA this kind of concept. Is that a long-winded answer to your simple question? Okay? Yes?
Can we still use that permeable pavement idea on the driveway aprons since it has to be so much thicker?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, it'll work on that. As long as we have enough voids in the concrete mix. I suppose there is some realistic limitation, but for normal pavements, it'll be okay.
I wonder how that would work, because isn't a big thing of the permeable pavements, like the vacuuming and the cleaning of the permeable pavements?
All green infrastructure is going to require a lot of maintenance.
Right.
There's absolutely, and that's part of the mix of the evaluation. We need to convince the EPA going forward that any plan that's presented that involves green infrastructure can be maintained as a permanent stormwater control. So that's going to require developing a program that is going to be acceptable to the EPA and that we can sustain going forward. Okay?
And you said this solved the CSOs, it brought all of them into compliance to the
Yes.
board? All of them?
Mhm.
Without
In-
any
in
other-
these, in these areas, yes.
in-
There's 68 overflows. The ones where we are showing the green infrastructure brought those overflows into compliance. There's a lot of other ones out
Okay.
there, yes. Okay? So, area 2 is the next one, and that was Parkwood. And Parkwood is an over and under sewer. Probably a good 60% of the city is an over and under type sewer system. Who do we have from area 2? Jim?
I don't know this stuff, she knows this stuff. All right, I'll start and then she can continue on. This is a abbreviated, condensed of all the things we talked about, but the first thing we talked about was downspout disconnection, trying to alleviate the surge into the storm drains. And that's gonna take some education and buy-in from the residents. We acknowledge that and get some thoughts on that too. The public and private infiltration and flow improvements such as relining or replacing laterals in public sewer, new manholes to bypass over and under access place, some infrastructure repairs and maintenance to improve that. And then the other part of increasing, upsizing the Detroit Avenue sewer to 4 foot in diameter, it's currently 1 foot. And then the Detroit and Nicholson sanitary sewer to 4 feet also, to alleviate, the pressure and the inflow of that there. we talked about how this could roll out in education and getting residents to buy in. It's gonna take, you know, I think we had an incentive program, maybe do like a contest, you know, have street winners for the highest percentage of residents that do some of the things that are recommended. We talked about also with the downspout disconnection, how you could integrate that into a landscaping design and maybe work with, have preferred landscapers that are, you know, are experts at that type of, you know, drainage and things like that. But that's the type, you know, we talked a lot about the buy-in from an education of residents to get it done properly. And then in addition to the public part of it in terms of the repairs and things like that. So did I miss anything? Kind of covers it?
That was an affirmative, yes.
Okay. I don't want to say anything.
Okay, so Parkwood being over and under sewer and the city having so many over and under sewers, the first thing we did was obviously model those suggestions for Parkwood. Now, Parkwood itself, at the end of the street, does not have an overflow, but there are a series of overflows along Detroit Avenue, essentially from Bell, or Bunce, I should say, to Clarence. And so what we modeled was the reduction in the amount of stormwater that was getting into the sanitary sewer as a result of the recommendations and preferences from this group. So when we looked at Parkwood and the streets that neighbor it, all of those streets are impacting these overflows along Detroit Avenue. And when that was modeled along with these green infrastructure initiatives, we got the overflows into compliance with the policy. Carrying that forward, as we talked about in our committee meetings, there is also an ongoing project down in the southwestern portion of the city, which is a pilot study to essentially prove in the field that the recommendations that the group came up with in Area 2 actually does work, and that is cost effective to do. And so in applying our lessons learned from this area along with the recommendations from the Area 2 group, this is the area of the city that approach would more than likely be applied to and would essentially take care of a bulk of the overflows in the city. Now, we have not modeled all of this yet. Oops. We have not modeled all of this. We are currently doing that to confirm that application of these approaches is going to work for all these overflows. And we are expecting in about a month, we're going to have results from that. But based on the preliminary work we did with the Parkwood group, we think that approach is going to remove enough clean water from the sanitary sewers to bring those overflows into compliance. And hopefully we're right. Any other questions on this area?
Not in this area, but you talked, the gentleman mentioned about educational opportunities. We've got a couple of environmental days coming up, end of this week, and then in May we've got River Day. Will the city have any stormwater booths set up? Where they could talk to people about this sort of program?
Good question. I put you on the spot, Joe, but are you aware of anything that's going to be at those birthday or anything?
Our Earth Day event is at the end of April. That's, clean up within town, tree planting.
Okay. So it's more in
We're
the
not,
field.
yeah,
Right.
we don't have any plans to participate out at do with the fairground or something like that.
Okay. And
In the solstice event in June, we're talking about trying to have information there and some education, maybe work with Cleveland's sewer district to get some of their education materials and things
Okay.
at that event, so
Okay.
more to follow.
Okay.
expanded area you're showing here, that's great news. I think it'll work in that much of the city. Why is it those areas and not, the other areas not highlighted? Is that because those areas all have over/under sewers?
To answer your question, let's go on, because I think you're going to see how it continues to address other areas of the city as it goes through the groups.
But there must be something structural, in streets and neighborhoods?
There are local overflows up in this area, up in these gray areas, that are best addressed at that level rather than trying to address it further downstream.
Okay, so it's not the reason I'm talking about.
Well, they are over and under sewers. I mean, all those gray areas are over and under sewers, so, the overflows that are there are somewhat tied to that type of system. So the approach has been suggested, more clean water we can get out of sanitary sewers, less likely we're going to have overflows, not only in the immediate areas of each of those streets, but how all that clean water affects the system as a whole.
I follow. And one rudimentary question, I'm embarrassed to ask, but should. How do you have an overflow in Detroit Avenue? I thought overflows find their way to the lake somehow, or the river.
They do, but many of those overflows go from a sewer into a storm line that goes directly to the lake.
Okay.
So while it happens at Detroit Avenue, the ultimate outfall is in that storm line that goes out to the
But
lake.
the leak happens somewhere
Yes.
at Parkwood in Detroit, for example.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay? Yes.
Just to clarify, you kept on saying this approach. Were you talking about downspout disconnection or full I&I removal?
We are talking
Like public, private, everything?
everything that's listed here, as well as what we're doing in the pilot area, which we're also going after the foundation drains.
Okay, so that gray area, it's solving the problem would require all of that compiled?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, next group was Area 3, which was Lake Avenue. Okay,
So we discussed a couple of things. We wanted to assess whether permeable pavement on the sidewalk would improve the situation. Also, that particular area has larger sized tree lawns, so we thought maybe putting a bioretention space there might help. We also wanted to look into downspout disconnection and a detention basin.
so much of Lake Avenue has combined sewers, much like the Larchmont approach. The combined sewers obviously are taking in a lot of stormwater. When we initially talked about this area, there was, when we modeled this area, we were able to get the overflow, which is actually officially listed in the city's permit as overflow CSO 058. We were able to get that overflow down to less than 4 overflows a year. There was a lot of talk about detention for this particular area. And we actually did model building a rather sizable detention basin. You may know where the Marathon Station is on Lake Avenue. We were looking at that location, which is adjacent to the sewer that goes out to CSO 058. As a location for a detention basin. And when we put it in there, we did bring the overflow into compliance. What happened though was when we got back and took a much closer look at the model, we found out that most of the water that was getting to that location from the south, which we had assumed consisted of a combination of sanitary and stormwater, in fact was only stormwater. And so to build that detention basin, it would have been essentially just a stormwater only detention basin, which is in some areas, that's a good idea, but wasn't really necessary for this location. So that's why you don't see that in the preferences here, because it was kind of a little bit of misinformation that we had that we gave to the committee to evaluate. Their preference was appropriate, but really not needed for this particular spot. So area 3, if it's applied to other areas, these lighter yellow areas along Lake Avenue would be likely candidates for the approach that was recommended by this group. Any questions on area 3? Okay. Area 4 was an interesting area. It's a bird town area. Who is going to speak for area 4?
I mean, I don't mind summarizing. Given the interesting historical nature of Birdtown and the fact that it's downstream from another significant neighborhood to the west of Madison Park, which has a couple of CSOs itself on Madison, we put together a couple of different ideas. And again, alluding to the size of the lots and the historical nature of the lots. We talked a lot about bioretention and where those opportunities may arise. One of them being at the school, being dead center in the middle of the neighborhood. There's a couple of opportunities there in regards to permeable pavement, grass bioretention areas, vacant lots that may exist within the neighborhood. We also talked about bump outs around fire hydrants, even though parking is at a premium, as is traffic area on the individual streets. We looked at bioretention in tree lawns and permeable pavement in the sidewalks. Again, because of the limited opportunities we have within the neighborhood, we took a good look at green roof garages and felt that if it was a feasible idea, it would have great applicability throughout the entire city. We also considered permeable pavement at the parking lots of Madison Park because those have direct runs just east of the 2 CSOs on Madison and drive a lot of clean water down Madison itself. We've also had to consider rerouting a lot of the water flow to the sewer district, just given the amount of volume that's coming down Madison and the fact that the neighborhood itself is all combined, correct? And Bob will allude to ultimately what may be the only solution we're looking at in regards to the combined overflow for the 459 overflow at the lake, given the fact that we really are limited in the southeast corner of the city as to what our options may be.
So we did model all of these various suggestions. We had some good results regarding the 2 overflows on Madison. Much of the green infrastructure recommendations, when combined in a cumulative analysis, indicated that we could get one of the 2 overflows into compliance, fully into compliance, and we are just on the cusp of getting the other one into compliance. And I think that's going to involve a little closer look at the regulator there to see if there could be some tweaking done to that to bring us into compliance. And these 2 overflows that we're speaking about are on Madison, right in this area. They overflow into a storm sewer that goes up Nicholson, out to the lake. So we can get basically those 2 into compliance, at least one of the 2, and the second one's close. By taking care of the bioretention. The green roof garages was really an interesting concept because particularly in residential areas, you don't really think much about green roofs. But I think this group saw an opportunity, given the fact that there are so many garages that probably need to be replaced over time, and that many of them have shed roofs, or could have shed roofs, that if you're going to replace a garage, now's the time to consider a green roof. And so you can beef up the structure, obviously, to support the added weight that goes along with the plant material on the roof. And there are significant amount of garages that over time could have a good impact on the amount of water getting into the combined sewers. Now, this is the Birdtown area that was actually the area that was assigned to this group. It was quickly realized that these two overflows, while we did somewhat lessen the amount of overflows by doing the green infrastructure in this area, we really needed to do the same thing in the area to the west. So that area to the west, the preferences from this area were also applied to this area, and that's how we were able to get those two overflows very close to compliance. This area, though, also is tributary to a larger downstream area. This lighter blue area is downstream of the Birdtown study area, and there is a complex system of sewers on West 117. And even today, in wet weather, part of that flow goes to the regional sewer district, part of it comes back into Lakewood. So there was some discussion about how do we reconcile that split and flow between Lakewood and the district. And that's a discussion that will probably be ongoing, but we also have alternatives, and the one alternative was the last item on the list here, which was this 15 million gallon detention basin somewhere in the Gulf Coast. It's not going to be easy to find 2.5 acres where we can put the detention basin, but it doesn't all have to be in one location. So it could be split up into 10 million gallons in one location, 5 in another. There are options to do that. That being said, this approach will bring the CSO 059, which is probably the largest one we have in the system. We'll bring it into 4 overflows in a typical year. So I think the exercise was difficult, but it was worthwhile to come up with this approach, because it certainly has made a difference in the number and volume of overflows at that location. Any questions on area 4? Yes, sir.
The one recommendation, the diverting to the NEO-RSD.
Yes.
Is that part of shutting the valve off at 117?
Yes,
Or-
yes,
okay.
that was that.
Putting it in
yes.
very simple
Put it in simple
terms.
terms, yes.
Shut the valve.
Yes,
So that flow would all then go,
yes.
okay.
Okay, so those were the 4 areas, and as you can see, that didn't cover the entire city. So what are we doing for the rest of the city? Well, one thing is that there are some areas that are peculiar to themselves that are going to require some combination of sewer separation, source control, and pumping. And we did not bring these areas to you to evaluate because, quite frankly, there was a lot of hydraulics in analyzing surcharging of the interceptor and how that surcharging backs up into local sewers, which have overflows at the end of them. And it, quite frankly, is a matter of separating the gravity connections between these areas and the interceptors so that we don't have those backup overflows anymore. So that separation will alleviate at least 4 overflows, and will also help mitigate basement flooding. So these are smaller projects. These are projects that will be standalone projects and not really tied to the rest of the recommendations. We also have 2 projects that are currently under construction or completed. One is in the old 56 area, which is Edgewater. The sewer has been in. We are currently going through a program of trying to connect residents to the new sanitary sewer. The other one is in the West End area, and I don't know if you've been down to Metro Parks lately, but there is a large aerial sewer that's being built across the Rocky River to the headworks of the treatment plant. And I believe we're at about 50% construction at this point, and that should be in service later this year, early next year. So this project will eliminate 2 overflows, and this one will eliminate 2 overflows also.
Bob, the total number at the end will be, what will Lakewood's total number of outflows be, or outfalls be?
Currently, we have 68. And this plan, up to this point, plus the last piece of it here, will address all 68 of those overflows.
At how many separate points?
68. They are scattered throughout the city.
Is the Edgewater, is there pumping there, or is that just ground?
No, there's no pumping. That was a combined sewer that was separated. The separation involved building a new sanitary sewer and turning the combined sewer into a storm sewer. So whatever was going out this overflow before, which was combined, will now be just stormwater going out. And then we have a project that is still in preliminary design, but will be submitted as part of this plan, which is the high-rate treatment facility at the Lakewood treatment plant. And the light brown areas are those areas that are directly tributary to the interceptor that comes down to the treatment plant, and they impact that overflow right there at the river. If you went on the tour of the treatment plant, you saw the structure on the north side of the river, which actually does not overflow to the river, it overflows to the lake. But that high-rate treatment will address all the flow from these lighter brown areas, as well as whatever residual sanitary flow comes from the rest of the city. So that treatment facility is about a 35 million gallon a day facility. We recently took a tour of a similar facility in Newark, Ohio. Unfortunately, I don't think that they're real happy with the planning that was done on that facility. We did take away some lessons learned. Their major concern was that the one in Newark was a 27 MGD facility. In an entire year, they only see 25 million gallons. So the facility is way over designed. Don't really know the reason why, but the fact of the matter is that they have a bit of a white elephant on their hands there right now. Completely different sewer system, completely different set of circumstances. But it was interesting to see this 3 or 4-year-old facility. When we walked into it, it was pristine. It was not what you would expect. So, the building of the plan involves a lot of green infrastructure, much more source control, some sewer separation, and some treatment at the treatment plant. But we believe after we've completed all the modeling, especially for the gray area, that we're going to be in compliance. We've already modeled the HRT. We know we can bring 002 into compliance with that 35 MGD facility. So I think we at least have the groundwork or the framework for the plan that we hope to submit in September. Any comments, questions? Yes, sir.
Question, just a point of clarification.
Yeah.
So there's 68 overflows, right? But how many points of, and I don't know the technical term, how many points of discharge do we have, either into the lake or into the river? There's not 68 points of discharge.
No,
right? What's
there's
the
not.
term for that? It's not overflow.
At one time, our list included 129 individual outflow points. We knew they were not all municipal sewers.
Okay.
So the city in the last year went through and looked at all those outfalls. A lot of them were 4 and 6 inch pipes. They were coming from private residences out to the lake and to the river. So I think the short list is around 50, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I was gonna say about 60, I think, that are, over the 6 inch, mark, that are permitted ones, and the rest would generally be considered storm outfalls.
Right. And we've been testing all the storm outfalls during dry weather to make sure that it was, number one, there wasn't any flow during dry weather. Or if there was flow during dry weather, we tested for fecal, just to see if it was actually just stormwater or that there was some indication of sewage in there. We did find some illicit connections and we addressed those. So they were kind of on the short list of things that we need to get done so that we can have untreated sewage going out to the lake all the time. So we've taken care of at least 3 of those locations. So, I mean, there's still a lot of outfalls. Some of them are going to end up being just storm outfalls. I mean, the intent is after all this is done, that and some of the sewer separation that we proposed for these purple areas, some of those questionable outfalls, we're going to be able to confirm they're just stormwater. Okay? Yes?
Sorry, I'm a new guest asking a lot of questions. I hope it's not breaking the rules, but brown areas that will be addressed by the high rate treatment facility, is your proposed recommendation or the groups that that's all that's needed there, and no source control there? And are those areas that have already been fixed successfully by other measures over the years?
I think that every area of the city is going to be subject to scrutiny regarding source control, even those areas that are tributary to the high rate treatment facility. I mean, the treatment facility is designed to treat the largest storm during a typical year. And that will bring us into compliance with the CSO policy. But we know that getting clean water out of the sanitary sewer system, whether you're in the HRT area or other areas, is beneficial for a couple of reasons. Number one, clean water takes up the gas in the sanitary sewers that during normal operation doesn't manifest itself as a problem, but when we have rain events, you end up with basement flooding. Whether you're in this brown area or not, you don't care whether it's being treated at the overflow, you don't want it in your basement. So I think looking forward, yeah, we can bring ourselves into compliance with the regulations by building the HRT, but we also want to protect the residents in those areas. So I think that that's that's gonna be something that's gonna have to be evaluated and looked at over time. We may not have a schedule that we have to adhere to in order to address those areas, but as a matter of policy, the city may want to look at continuing that program into those areas.
And a follow, that's helpful to understand where you're coming from. So, am I to read this diagram as that the high-rate treatment facility would only drain, accept and treat water draining from those brown areas? Or is it not that, it's accepting water citywide, it's just that the extra capacity covers the regulated overflow question we're dealing with?
The high rate treatment is taking the flow from the interceptor, so the whole city goes to the interceptor.
Okay.
But these brown areas don't have any other overflows associated with them other than down at the treatment plant.
So that'll get
So
us
there's
there.
nothing back up in the system to do to control overflows in these brown areas.
Thank you.
But they would be using capacity that these gray areas
Yes.
could drain to. So
Yes.
it does seem like there's a whole chunk that gets off pretty easy
Well,
when they're using capacity still, if their laterals are incorrectly connected, et cetera.
we've talked about source control a lot, and we expect that that's going to be kind of the basic foundation for the integrated wet weather improvement plan. How that's done throughout the city and where it's done and under what schedule is still something that in phase 2 needs to be discussed. And so, these brown areas, I'm not going to say they're getting a pass because it may be part of the overall approach, depending on how it's crafted, that there won't be specific target areas that will have to have the source control. It may be a general program. Some cities do a point of sale. If your house is sold, it has to undergo an inspection, and corrections need to be made before you finalize the transfer. But, that's one concept. There's a number of different ways to do it. That still has to be all worked out. And it all has to be worked out within some sort of agreed upon schedule with the EPA. I would think we would all be happy if we had 100 years to do this. I don't think that's going to be the case, but
How long will we have?
we don't know yet. I think, Lou, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the sewer district at one time was looking at a 30-year plan, and the EPA said, no, you have to cut it back to 20 years, if I recall.
The sewer district's consent decree is a CSO-only consent decree. They got 25 years, which is the most of any CSO-only consent decree in the country. There are other places like Cincinnati, I think I mentioned when I talked to you guys, which has a phased approach, which has a 10-year increments. They schedule out 10 years. So there is no actual end date yet. So depending on the different approaches that you take, depending on what's here, if we're doing a lot of source control and it might take 50 years to get around the city, that might be part of the plan. That's all part of the wonderful discussions we're going to have with EPA over the next several years.
Wonderful discussion.
Wonderful, interesting, cutting-edge discussions we're going to have.
Well, everybody knows what the cost is per house for source control. $10,000 to $15,000 per house.
Actually, we've been averaging less than that. And I think the last number I heard, it was about $6,500 per home in the source control area. Now, we're not done yet, but we have written quotes from the contractor on at least 50 of those homes, and they've been averaging around $6,500.
For what?
To replace the beeline or replace the sanitary lateral, to redirect the downspouts to a stormwater connection, and to remove the foundation drains through disconnecting them from the sanitary and putting them into a sump pump. So that due date has been the number. Yes,
That 6,500 average, does that include even the homes where no work was done?
no, there are, we haven't obviously done all the homes yet. There's 104 homes, whereas there's going to be about 40%.
No, I mean where you've gone to a home and seen that they were properly separated, so really there was nothing that needed to be done extensively to that one and you were able to.
So far, we've had one.
Those are all quotes
Yeah.
for actual work. That's what
There was one that actually recently had waterproofing done. I think Mike will claim that his was also in compliance, so. But regardless, by and large, we're not finding that there's any significant number of homes that are strictly sanitary going to sanitary and storm going to storm. Okay, yeah, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Okay, all right.
We'll entertain this one.
Yes, so we're at this point now where we're wrapping up what your work was, but what we are hoping you will do is reflect back on your experience with this group. If you recall, one of the charges of the group was to help communicate and engage with the community to work on public awareness of this issue. And so we thought that we would pass out a survey for you, this one sheet here that has a list of questions that we wanted you to think through and jot down some ideas, because we think that your responses will help us then try to fashion what a public awareness and communication program would look like. Try to figure out what the best way is to reach your friends and neighbors. And starting out by giving us an idea of what your awareness of was prior to coming to the first meeting and going through all of this. We gave you a lot of information, but thinking back to what you knew about the city's sewer issues. Some of you were much more familiar with the situation than others. But based on what you knew, what had been in the news, what you were aware of, it's interesting for us to know so that we can kind of figure out where the rest of the community is in terms of their level of awareness. What you've learned then in going through this process, we're not going to have the opportunity to bring everybody into the room and go through and take them on a tour of the water treatment plant or go to the stewardship center. But we gave you a lot of information. We hope that that was beneficial, and then if it was, then we want to figure out a way to communicate that in a reasonable way to the rest of the community. And so your reflection back on the process will be really helpful to us. Also, what we're interested in knowing is if there is still information that you think is important. We know there's a lot of questions about cost and effectiveness, which were not really part of this first phase. As Bob said, those will all be considerations, factors that need to be taken into consideration as the plan goes forward. But if there are things that you think would have been helpful to know, that's good for us to know then too, in terms of what else we would need to provide to other folks. And then lastly, your feedback on how this group process worked in terms of how it met your needs, the scheduling, things like that. Whatever seemed to, what you liked about the process and what you think we could have improved upon. So we'll give you a few moments with that. The other thing I would say is we gave you a little index card. So one of the things that Colin was doing, as you saw, was videotaping. He also would like to interview some of you, anyone who is interested. And so one of the things that we thought you could do is write your name and contact information on the little card. And one of the questions or responses would be, what would you tell your neighbor of what you've learned here? What would you communicate to your neighbors? So if you're interested in participating in that, that would be most helpful as well. So we'll give you a little bit of time, and then I think we'll come back in maybe 5 minutes and go through some of your comments.
Everyone, on those little cards, even if you don't want to be interviewed, it would just be helpful to have a statement from you. Just, I don't know, what I guess the best thing you learned about this, the most important thing you learned, what you would convey to your neighbors.
They could be quoted?
Yeah. You could be either quoted, just because we want to share with everyone what you learned from it.
Did everyone get?
We used this for.
Oh, okay.
And while you're doing that, I want to mention again, I do this for a living. I represent communities all across the state and in the country, and I've had EPA people and Ohio EPA people come up to me to talk about how impressive this group is in Lakewood, the work that you've done. This level of detail, this commitment by a task force like this to show up over the course of a year in the work that you're doing. So just while council people and your neighbors and others are here, I want to, on behalf of Mayor Summers, who wishes he was here, and the city, congratulate you and thank you for help putting Lakewood at the forefront of that. And I think we owe them a round of applause.